Welcome to the Love Lessons podcast, a space for you to invest in your most important relationships 20 minutes at a time. Today I sit down with Dan and Charlie Blythe to discuss creating and sustaining healthy relationships. Here's today's episode. Dan and Charlie, it's epic to have you with us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us. This is amazing.
Tell us a little bit more about what you're up to when you're not recording a podcast.
Just preparing for this podcast, just praying, interceding, making that. What are we doing? We're raising 2 kids, and I work for Alpha. I'm the International Global Youth Director, which pretty much means I just get to travel the world, listening to youth and youth leaders and church leaders, just make sure that we keep creating content and culture that's going to serve the local church. So that's what I do.
Yeah, and as you said, I work for a charity called A21, which is a global anti-trafficking organisation. And so we have one mission and one mission only, and that is to abolish slavery everywhere forever. Like you said, I oversee Europe, and we're just passionate about basically reaching and rescuing and restoring the lives of survivors who have been trafficked or in modern slavery. A lot of people, they think slavery was abolished a couple of hundred years ago, but actually there's more slaves in the world today than at every point in history. So that's what we do. That's what I do. And
you two have been married 13 years. But just take us all the way back to the beginning. How did you two meet?
There you go.
Well, we actually met at a Christian festival quite similar to this, actually. And I was quite recently saved. I grew up in a Christian home. My mum's actually a leader of a church. I got to an age where I didn't really... She said, if you don't want to come to church anymore, you don't have to. And I was out the back door and wasn't going anymore. And then I went to Sydney, got quite radically saved, came back. And my mum's church was going to this sort of youth festival. And I thought, oh, all right, I'll give it a go along. Definitely went there to encounter God, but encountered Dan and God. Sorry, that sounded really bad. No, both. That sounded really bad. And yeah, I definitely encountered God, by the way, and I didn't go for him. And yeah, we met there. So I was in a cafe, and you came over to me and started talking to me.
Yeah, I did, which is quite I'm quite an introvert. Walking up to girls scares me. And so I wasn't, there was just something about Charlie. Yeah, a few people can relate to that. But yeah, I don't know why. Actually, I was with a friend, and I just said, I don't know why I need to go and say hello to her. And he said, yeah, I've got the same feeling. I said, no, you haven't. And I just literally just went straight over and just started a random conversation, and that's where it started.
The funny thing is we had conversations. The festival was like 3 days long. 3 days long, and we kept meeting in the cafe and chatting, getting to know each other. And then on the last day, I lived in Southampton and he lived in Canterbury, and he's like, cool, yeah, great to meet you then, bye. And I was like, whoa, that's so weird. He got in his car and he's just about to drive off, and I was like, so I went up to the car and I was like, excuse me, gave him a bit of paper. I was like, I think you forgot my number. Walked off. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for her courage.
We were both quite bold in that Christian festival. You approaching me and me giving you my number, and then...
Then we became MySpace fans. Not fans, MySpace friends.
Music in the background, little profile picture.
In fact, our first wedding dance was my MySpace music song. Yeah. For a lot of you in the room, you're like, what is MySpace? It was just like before all the social medias you have now, you built your own page and profile, and that was where you went to like scroll through everyone's photos and like them. And if you liked photos which were like years old, that's showing that you'd actually gone through all their photos, which really kind of indicated that you really liked them. I don't know if it's the same these days, but...
So I want to dig into a bit of the dating world for you two, because there'll be a lot of people in this room and listening on the podcast about how you navigate dating well, because we've probably all experienced it being done like badly, or perhaps we've realised we've made some mistakes in how we've dated. And again, often in the church, we don't tend to have like talks on how to do dating well. So do you mind if we just go there with you two of what that looked like for you both, but also just generally, like, what are some things we should be thinking about as we think about dating?
Okay. Yeah. So when we started dating, actually, we started being friends, and then I was a youth pastor in Canterbury, and I had 30 young people that I was mentoring, discipling, and I really felt at the time then they were my priority. And so we like connected and really liked each other, but I said I wasn't ready to date you, and you thought I was an idiot.
Well, yeah, the way you went about it, I think.
What?
Yeah. No, I think it was like we'd connected, it was going really well, MySpacing all the time. And then you were like, by the way, for a year, I'm just focusing on youth ministry. So, And I was like, oh, okay, what does that mean then? He was like, yeah, nothing. So for a year, we just chatted on MySpace and I was like, all right, we'll just keep chatting. And
but it was actually like one of the healthiest things for us that we just got to build up this friendship, you know, over time. And also, while I was leading this youth ministry, I just wanted to make sure I was in the healthiest place I could be. You're never going to reach this place of perfection, but I know I'd messed up in a lot of previous relationships before. And with this relationship, like, I just didn't want to rush into it. And so for us, that long distance was actually healthy because we just kind of grew together and got to learn about each other.
And it was literally a year. He said, I just needed a year to focus on my youth ministry, work on myself, and all of that kind of stuff. And it was quite funny. So we'd chat on MySpace a little bit. And then one day I got this call on my mobile, and it was from a random number. And it was Dan, and he was like, I'm in a payphone, sorry. Like, I'm about to run out soon, but I'm driving down to Southampton. What's your address? And I was like, and I was living with my mum at the time. And I was like, yeah. And I gave him my address. And he's like, okay, gotta go, bye. And I was literally...
It sounds weird when you say it like that.
Yeah, no... It
was romantic.
Yeah, no, it was quite romantic. I mean, I was literally like, imagine my nerves. I haven't seen this guy in a year. We've just been chatting on MySpace. I'm like to my mum, by the way, there's a guy coming round who I met at a Christian festival. And then it was quite sweet because he did come all the way down and he said, I haven't stopped thinking about you for a year. And I've done work. I know, he is a sweetie.
Whereas for Charlie, she had not been thinking of me for a year and dated someone in between.
Oh, Charlie, you missed out that detail.
Yeah, but I quickly got out of that one and jumped back to this one. Jumped ships pretty quick.
Okay, we'll find out how you did the transitions there, because that'd be interesting.
No, it was. There's nothing else to say on that. It was like a real coincidence. You had broken up like a month before I randomly got in touch.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think it was a real God thing, and the timing was perfect.
Before we go, and just so Dan, you've got a few ways of discerning and how you date, who's the right person. But Charlie, just say, like, how did you end that relationship well? Because again, that's something we're not always very good at, finishing well.
Yeah, well, I actually had a bit of a childhood sweetheart that I'd been with from the age of like 16 years, and so I went backpacking to Australia with my boyfriend when I was 18. Went there, and on sort of my last month, I was there just under a year. My last month of being there, someone took me to church, and I was quite radically saved. And went back home and quickly realised that the relationship I was in wasn't working out because I was a completely different person. We had completely different values, realised we weren't going in the same direction. And it was painful because we had been together for many, many years. And I said to him, actually, it was really hard because he said, well, I can try and come along. You know, I understand that you want to, you know, be a Christian and have a faith, and I'm actually all good with that, you know. And I was kind of like, I get that, but we're just I'm a completely different person, and this isn't going to work. And so, yeah, I did end that relationship, and I actually just completely moved up to London because I knew I just wanted to start afresh. And yeah, it wasn't easy to do, but I knew it was the right thing to do for sure.
Talk about values. That's really helpful. Dan, say a bit more about that. Like the things you look for when you're dating, or even before that point, knowing whether that's the right person to continue with.
So some of you might think differently to me, and that's okay. I hope as you're listening to us, we're not saying this is the way. This is just us speaking from our experience of our relationship with Jesus. But we wouldn't believe that there's just one person that you're compatible with, like finding the one. In fact, if I died, I'd hope Charlie would find someone else who could help love her, look after her, and raise our kids. And I think there would be many people that she could potentially be compatible with. So I don't believe there is the one. But I do think you can choose one person to spend the rest of your life with really well. And some of the things that I look for, I call them the 3 C's. So first one would be character, and that's number one. That someone actually has the same values and principles, you know, that I do. And like being married 13 years, like this one, I can't say like how important it is that our values are the same, because it just gets harder and harder. So character would be number one. Chemistry would be number two. And chemistry is different to like lust or chemistry would be kind of like when you're like you got this intense connection with someone, and it's all the way through the Bible. It's in Song of Songs, but like you can't really put your finger on it. But you know, there's this chemistry. So when I saw Charlie, like I was attracted to her, but when I talked to her through seeing her character, I was actually really drawn. And there was this chemistry there. And so that I'd go for character, I'd go for chemistry, and then I'd also go for calling. Now, calling is like, when you kind of know your purpose. And all the way through the Bible, it kind of talks about, sort of like what your calling is. But I don't think it's so much of a career. Like sometimes you say, God, am I a dietitian, or am I going to be a doctor, or am I going to be this, going to be that? But actually, I just see in the Bible, God wants us to become more like Jesus and take as many people with us as possible. But he does, kind of give you different people on your heart that you actually want to help. Like Charlie's heart breaks for people who have been trafficked, and my heart breaks for teenagers. I just want to help them. And I would say that's linked to my calling. And I remember dating a girl when I was in Australia at Bible college. Her name was Amy. And we got told at Bible college to ask someone out on a date. It's like homework. I'm like, really? I'm like, that's crazy, homework. But I did. I asked her out, and she was one of the worship leaders. And when we started dating, things got just escalated really quick. And like 3 months in, we're like telling each other like we love each other. She had great character. There was definitely chemistry there. But we never really spoke about our calling. We never really spoke about like what we wanted to do with the rest of our life. 6 months into the relationship, we're having this conversation. She's like, so what do you want to do with your future? I'm like, I definitely want to go back to England. I definitely want to help young people. She's like, oh, well, I'm going to America for, my music career. I'm like, well, I'm going to England. She's like, well, I'm going to America. I'm like, yeah, but I am actually going to England. She's like, well, I am actually going to America. And so we're like, well, this isn't going to work then. She's like, no. So we just broke up. And it was like awkward and painful. And the hard thing is that she was a worship leader, and sometimes when you're a songwriter, you struggle to find content to write about. But luckily, pain is a source that enables you to write. And she invited me to her EP launch, which was like 2 months after the breakup. And I didn't want to go, but then I didn't want to make it awkward, so I walked in, and I'm standing in the back, and it's a room similar to this sort of side. And I walked in, and the opening song goes like this. Why'd you go and start this dream if you were gonna leave in the first place? Like literally, and she's staring straight at me, and everyone in the room just turned to look at me as like, how could you do that? And I was just like, well, if someone had told me about the 3 C's, then I wouldn't have been here.
Dan, where can we find that song? Is that on Spotify or? In fact, we've got it here right now. No, just a joke. Charlie, just tell us a bit about, because dating in the church can be complicated. So I've got a friend of mine who said, Dave, last week, she's like, I've started dating 2 guys a week. I've got to try and find the right person. So she's not a Christian, not in the church, but in the church, if someone started doing that, it's like you suddenly become, a player because you're having coffees with multiple people. Just say a bit how you might navigate that in the dating in the church, and what are some of the, I guess, challenges of that? Because in a way, the church should be the most stunning example of how to do relationships well, but you also need to talk to people to get to know them. Yeah,
and the only way you're going to find out if you've got those 3 C's in common, like calling, chemistry, and character, is by hanging out with someone, right? You're not going to walk up to someone and see that, all 3, tick, tick, tick. You have to go for coffee with someone or for a drink with someone to know that. And I think it's such a shame because in the church, you're under so much scrutiny, and everyone's staring, ooh, they've gone for a coffee. And actually I personally am that's fine. That's how someone gets to know someone. And if then that doesn't work out, that's fine too. Obviously, you do get players, and we all know them.
I actually don't think that there should be players in the church in terms of if you are going to go on multiple dates to find out what someone's like. I'd go on a date with someone, and then if you sense actually this one isn't right, then you can say, however you're going to, it's not going to happen again. But then I wouldn't be going on multiple at the same time as if all these people are thinking you're leading them on. And you just keep giving it's like trying to keep your options open. I think actually, just because if you want to respect the person that you've asked out on a date, it just means that you're not kind of giving the same idea to all these different people.
Charlie, just say a bit about the impact of a swipe right culture within, and say more about that and the impact that has for us as with navigating relationships.
Yeah, I mean, the swipe right culture is all about, everything's on surface level, everything's about looks, you're just swiping right, that's what you're basing your decision on primarily. We live in a very sexualized society, unfortunately, and unfortunately this has become sort of the priority or what's valued. I think in my job, for example, because we live in such a sexualized society, I get to see things like the statistics and what that leads to. Things like sexting, for example, 1 in 4 young people have sent nude pictures of themselves, for example, and 61% of those, 1 in 4, would have been pressurized to do that or felt like they needed to do that, because these days, like, sexuality or being sexy is what's valued. And I think actually in this society, that's not what God values. Godliness is way more important than sexiness, and holiness is way more important than hotness. And I think this is where it goes back to what is important. Where do you get your value? I know that my value is not in how sexy I am or how not sexy I am. And I think you just can't base your decisions on this sort of looks, shallow, surface level stuff, because like we've just talked about at the beginning, the 3 C's again, you're not going to see that in the old swipe right culture. So yeah, I think it's just valuing godliness over sexiness in today's sexualized society. And not everyone's there, and not everyone values that. But I believe as Christians, that is what we should be valuing. I think we should take pride in our godliness. I think that's what we should be striving for. And I think then when it comes to like dating and stuff like that, I think you're going to find that godliness in the end is sexier anyway.
It's good, Charlie. How did you guys navigate that in your relationship, prioritizing godliness over sexiness? You've had 13 years together, years before dating. How did you, let's just stay on the sex theme. How did you guys navigate all of that whole world together when you were dating and now married? If that's not too personal.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, I think I was always drawn towards Charlie's character more than anything, because I knew I was getting married for life. You know, I wasn't, and so that means if you're doing life, that means we're both going to be old and grey and wrinkly and, you know, whatever together. So that means, like, there has to be something deeper than just looks, because if it's only looks that are keeping us there, then what's going to hold us together for the long run? So, you know, we definitely both do what we can to keep ourselves still attractive to each other in terms of, like, you know, I work out, go to the gym, not that she really cares, but I do. And Charlie, well, like, I think healthy lives. But yeah, I think, like,
I mean, when we were dating and stuff, like...
Yeah, both.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think what you're trying to insinuate is, like, boundaries and stuff like that when we were dating and things like that. Yeah, like, we definitely... this was my first relationship that I had where I was a Christian. I was not a Christian when I was in my previous relationship, so I definitely went into this relationship with different values and knowing what I did want to do and what I didn't want to do. And so I think it's really important when you are in a dating relationship or about to enter into a relationship, you do know what your boundaries are. I think this isn't something to be set when you're in the relationship. Kind of know that before you go into the relationship, because we all know the temptation is huge, and in relationships when you are dating. And so for us, we put in boundaries right from the offset, and we actually talked about it right from the offset. And yeah, that's like an awkward conversation to have, but it was one of the healthiest conversations that we could have.
We even put boundaries to boundaries, which is, again, a bit weird, but like, we're like, this is what we don't want to, so we had a kind of boundary before the boundary, just because we just really wanted to make sure there was certain elements of our marriage that we just wanted to focus on before, right?
There can be a lot of fear associated with relationships, getting into the relationship. Is it the right person? Maybe I've been let down in the past before. Do I go there again? What are some of the other fears that you would see within relationships, and how do we conquer them?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's loads. In my teenage years, I suffered a lot with fear and anxiety, and it's always something, it's like part of my testimony, you know, and it's something that I still have to, like, wrestle with. It's like the thorn in my flesh. And so I think the biggest fear for me was going into this relationship was, I knew it was different dating Dan than, you know, the previous people that I'd gone on dates with or my previous boyfriend. And because I knew there was a depth there. But I think my biggest fear was just being real and vulnerable with someone and someone seeing everything. I did know from Dan, from the early days, that I wanted to spend my life with him. I did know we were getting married, so I knew that this means he's going to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that was a big deal for me. It wasn't my fear and anxiety. It wasn't something I talked about. It wasn't something my friends knew about. It was something that, you know, I'd be life and soul of the party when I was with my friends or out in the clubs, and then I'd go home and be riddled with anxiety, throwing up at night in fear of what the next day was going to hold. So for me, knowing that someone was going to know this stuff about me was a big thing for me. And I was very fearful about, him seeing not just surface level Charlie, not even just a little bit of depth Charlie, but like all of Charlie. So I think that was probably my biggest fear going into it.
Yeah, I think most things are rooted in fear of failure or fear of rejection when it comes to relationships. And if we all just took a moment just to imagine what your future would look like without the fear of failure and without the fear of rejection, wouldn't it be an amazing life to live? And that's the life that God has for us. Well, that's the one that he wants us to live anyway. And so spending time in our Bible with Jesus is us trying to, step into that life that, he kind of has for us. But I think for us, like, the closer we've got to Jesus, the closer we've got to each other. And we don't believe at love at first sight because, love is, 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, love is kind, does not envy, does not boast, is not proud, does not dishonor others, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth, always trusts, always hopes, always protects, always perseveres. Love never fails. And I love that because that you can't see on a swipe right, that you can't, even see, in a week. Like, this takes time to see if someone's got that, and it takes time to you to grow in those things, to become like Jesus. And so I think for us, the way I've dealt with fear is by understanding God's love for me more. If perfect love casts out all fear, if you want to overcome your fear of rejection, if you want to overcome your fear of failure, to step into the healthiest relationship you could possibly have, it all comes from just spending time with him and understanding his love for you.
Wow, that's good. Dan and Charlie, before we, in a second, I'm going to ask you to give, Dan a particular message to the guys in the room right now, and Charlie, the same to the ladies in the room. Anything particular you want to say to them before we wrap up? But let's just go to marriage for a second, because marriage. A lot of my friends, their parents have been divorced, and there'll be lots of people in this room and listening who have experienced really messy breakups, maybe themselves or in their family. And I increasingly think we talk a lot about how to do marriage, but we don't always spend a lot of time saying why do you do it? Why marriage in the first place? Sometimes because of our experiences in the past, and I'm just interested. Why did you get married, and why was it important for you to take that step, and why is it, I guess, important for us to consider it? I think sometimes we've made marriage the ultimate relational goal in the church, and that's therefore created quite a lot of pressure. I guess fear of timing could be another one of I'm not sure if I'm on the right time scale, married by this time, kids by this point. Just tell us a bit about the thinking of why you got married.
Yeah, I mean, it is sad today. I think I even read about it the other day, 42% of marriages in the UK end up in divorce now, which is a really high statistic. So you can understand why people might not want to get married, might be fearful of getting married. Why, if you see so many people entering into it and then getting divorced, would you want to be married? I think the main thing for me is actually if I explained it like this, imagine you've got some water sports going on. So let's just say you've got water skiing, okay? You're on the surface, you're going along, you can't see below the sea, right? It's lots of fun, but it's very surface level. That's kind of your surface level relationship. Maybe you're dating at the moment. But then you could go to another level in your relationship, and let's just say that's snorkeling, yeah? You start to be vulnerable with each other, you start to show a bit more of each other, and maybe open up about further things. Your relationship goes to another level, you can see beneath the surface a bit, it's beautiful, there's some fish, but scuba diving, let's just go there, that's at the very bottom of the ocean. You don't get more depth than that. And I think for me, that is the beauty of marriage, and that is what sets it apart from water skiing, snorkeling. You go to a depth that you just can't go in any other kind of relationship. You see beauty, you see what you cannot see on the surface, or even just a little bit below the surface. And when you enter into marriage, it's a commitment you've made. It's not based on feelings. It's not something you enter into lightly, hence why people aren't rushing in to get married. And so when you do, it's this commitment, and it's this depth that you know you're going to go to, that you can go to because you're deciding to get married. And so I think that's, for me, why I think marriage is beautiful. And yeah.
Are we scuba diving at the bottom, or can we go deeper? Is there more depth?
I don't think so, babe. I think we're
just
I
on the
think
bottom.
we're rock bottom.
Yeah.
That's
yeah, rock bottom. But just in terms of, why marriage, and I think this is such a good question, but like in Ephesians 5, like Jesus is described as the groom and the church is the bride, because that's like the ultimate picture that they're trying to paint of like commitment, connection, and a love that won't end. So even though the church might turn their back on Jesus, he's never going to turn his back on the church. Like there's such a love there. And I think, for us in our marriage, the reason we want to get married is because like we were all in. Like it was just that level of commitment. And I think if we hadn't got married, there would have been times when we're like, well, I could give up now, or I don't have to, forgive you, and I don't have to listen to you. But actually, the fact that we're married has caused us to press in and to forgive. And it's actually within marriage when I'd say I've done most of my Christ transformation within our marriage, because when you get married, there's like this mirror that shows you all your rubbish parts, and it sucks. But if you give it to God, it's the best thing ever. So
there's a course I came across called, it's a new one called Your Direction, which is designed particularly for kids of parents who've been divorced. So it may be someone in the room today or someone listening who's like, actually, that's me. I need some help. And so that resource is available, and we'll give a link to that. What would you want to say to this room before we wrap up? Anything final, Charlie, Dan, that you'd want to say?
Am I talking to the lads and you're talking to the girls, do you say?
Yeah, and whatever you want to do, yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, if I'm just talking to the lads, so I'd say, like, I only want to look at Charlie for the rest of my life, right? And know that it's a bit cheesy, the kind of apple of your eye. But if you only let one person in your eye, there's no room for anyone else. And so I'm always so attracted to Charlie every time. Like even if she's just getting changed or going to the shower, I'm like, do you know what you're doing right now? Like come on. Like she thinks it's nothing. I'm like, this isn't fair. But like I'm married 30 years and I'm still attracted. But I know as long as I keep doing what I'm doing, even in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, even when we are old, and the looks fade or whatever, I'm still going to be attracted as long as I don't let anyone else in here. So that means I need to be really, really disciplined with what I look at social media, what I look at on the TV, what shows I watch. Even like if I'm walking across Focus, it's like you're not double looking, and it's this thing called bouncing eyes. It's like you might see someone who's beautiful, but you're making a decision that you're not going to focus on the beauty of someone else and start allow lust or desire to build, but you just bounce off, and you can be aware of that that God has created beautiful people, but you've decided to give your life to one person, therefore you're going to keep your eye just focused on their beauty. So that was mine. What would you say?
Yeah, I just would say that above anything, the best thing you can find in someone is someone that points you to Jesus. And I know that sounds a bit cheesy, but for me, like I talked about, so the thorn in my flesh is always going to be my anxiety and worry. And the thing about Dan is, it doesn't matter what I say. I mean, it's not even about the anxiety or the worry or the fear. It doesn't matter if I've had a bad day, if I've got a bad attitude. He is constantly pointing me towards Jesus. And it's really annoying at times. And sometimes I'm like, shut up. Like, just let me vent or let me. But actually, for me, it's like the best thing ever. And I think having someone that makes you better, someone that makes you press into Jesus in your hard times rather than them or something else or someone else, is the most healthy thing you can have in a relationship. So I would just say, like, if you are dating, if you're not dating, if you're thinking about dating, just remember having someone that makes you better by pointing you to Jesus is of paramount importance, because it is absolutely game-changing.
So good, Charlie. Thank you. Guys, would you be willing to pray for us, and then we'll wrap up?
Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for everyone in this room here. And as we've shared some things, I just pray that no one's sitting here with guilt or condemnation. No one's sitting here with fear and worry and anxiety. But I just pray for an overwhelming sense of your peace just to fill everyone's heart right now. Lord, and I pray where any people are, wherever we are in our relationship status, Lord, that pressure of having to be a certain way or have a certain status by a certain time in our life, that fear of all of that pressure will just leave, and we can just have healthy friendships, and that we can just see them flourish and become, other more meaningful relationships, whether they go on to be relationships where we spend the rest of our life with someone or not. Lord, we just pray that Focus will be a place of healthy, safe relationships where people make friends, which are friends that will walk this journey with you for life, pointing them to Jesus. In your mighty name, amen.
Amen. Hey, should we show our appreciation to Dan and Charlie Blythe? Thank you so much for joining us at the Love Lessons podcast, and we look forward to seeing you for the next episode.